Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start our discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles. See, I always tell the students that never ignore the Sunday newspaper because on Sundays, you may not have your regular editorials and columns, but there are some detailed explained articles and FAQ articles which gives you a lot of insightful information both for prelims and mains examination. So there are 7 topics today. Let's cover them in a comprehensive manner so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a couple of important announcements. If you're preparing for prelims 2026, or if you're looking to attempt a full-length prelims question paper, you have a great opportunity on the 1st of March as Unacademy would be conducting All India UPSC Prelims mock test. So you will get a chance to attempt a full-length UPSC standard question paper and also get a All India rank with post-test analysis. So those interested to take up the mock test, please register by using the link provided in the description below. Then the second announcement, as part of Conquer Prelims under Phase 2, we have been conducting free special classes on the Unacademy app. So under Phase 2, our focus is to help you cover all the PYQs, the previous year prelims questions, and also look at a lot of practice MCQs based on these previous year questions. So this will also help you cover some current affairs as the MCQs that we are designing based on previous year questions, they are primarily derived from the recent current developments. So as part of the ongoing series, today and tomorrow, I'll be conducting the second and third lecture for international relations. So don't forget to join me live at 6:30 p.m. on the Unacademy app. So on the platform, you can search for my profile and under the free classes section, you will find these classes which are scheduled. So yesterday was the first class. We have 2 more classes to go today and tomorrow. So don't forget to join me at 6:30 p.m. So let's get started and look at the first topic. We have multiple articles in today's newspaper that helps us understand the outcomes of AI Impact Summit. As you all know, India hosted a high profile diplomatic event over the last 4 to 5 days. The AI Impact Summit has led to the signing of the New Delhi Declaration. This in itself is a big milestone and a big achievement for Indian diplomacy because India has managed to bring around 85 major countries and 3 international organizations. So, in total, 88 participants have signed the New Delhi Declaration, including major powers in the field of artificial intelligence, such as United States, China, France, and others. So that's what makes the AI Impact Summit very eventful. And it again highlights India's role in global diplomacy. Few years ago in 2023, when India hosted the G20 summit, even then, India had managed to convince all the participants, and we brought out a joint statement, the New Delhi Declaration of the G20, which highlighted India's role in bringing the divided world together at a time when US Russia were not talking to each other, at a time when US China were hostile to each other. India managed to bring out a joint statement and a declaration with regard to the 2023 G20 summit. So something similar has been achieved by India at the AI Impact Summit as well by convincing 88 major participants, 85 countries and 3 international organizations to sign the New Delhi Declaration. So in this context, we need to dive deep into this topic and understand what are the key highlights of the New Delhi Declaration. What was India's priorities going into the AI Impact Summit? What achievements have been brought out? What does this mean for the future of AI, especially domestic AI and technologies being developed in India? So to understand this, first we need to look at the background. See, the AI summits, it goes back to 2023 when the first AI summit, the Safety Summit, was hosted by United Kingdom at the famous Bletchley Park. Bletchley Park is a very famous location, a historic location. It's also the birthplace of modern computing. because this is where Alan Turing and a bunch of mathematicians, they broke the Enigma code of the Nazis, thus marking a pivotal point, a turning point in the Second World War. So, at this historic location, UK hosted the first ever AI summit. And please understand, there is no other global multilateral initiative to look at AI related issues, AI risks, and AI global governance. Even under the United Nations, you don't have any such multilateral platform which is available. So, when this initiative was started in 2023, this was the only platform to deal with all the risks and safety concerns associated with AI and to provide for a global regulatory framework to promote innovation and the advances in the field of artificial intelligence. So, the Bletchley Park Summit, the Safety Summit, as the name itself tells you, the focus here was on containing AI risks. The focus was on promoting safe AI and preventing the development of harmful AI, which could threaten jobs or which could threaten humanity itself, which could threaten democratic systems and liberal world order. So the Bletchley Declaration that was adopted, it brought out a lot of consensus amongst the countries. Around 28 nations signed on to it, including India, and they came to an agreement that there should be a certain regulation on risky AI. Harmful AI and harmful applications of AI should not only be dealt with, but it should be actively prevented by governments. Essentially, the governments which are signatories to it, they are committing themselves in a voluntary manner to ensure that tech companies do not develop and roll out harmful AI, which could pose any kind of social, economic, or security risk for humanity. So, this was the first major outcome, the Bletchley Declaration. Then, the next summit in 2024 was hosted by South Korea in Seoul, which was a follow up to the AI Safety Summit. There was no other major outcome. It was just a follow up on the Bletchley Declaration. But the next major AI summit was in Paris last year, the AI Action Summit, hosted by France, where India was a co chair. So the Paris AI Action Summit brought out many key outcomes. So now the focus had shifted towards sustainable AI, inclusive AI. Since the safety and the risk factors had been addressed under the Bletchley Declaration during the UK summit, now the focus was on sustainable AI, environment friendly AI, and inclusive AI. So, under the Paris Declaration, many statements and initiatives were rolled out with the backing of France and India. For example, the statement on inclusive and sustainable AI, the Coalition for Environmentally Sustainable AI, which is also backed by the UN Environment Programme and the International Telecommunication Union, which are specialized agencies and programs of the United Nations. So these key outcomes were brought out, focusing on environmental sustainability and inclusivity. There was also a declaration dealing with the regulation of autonomous weapon systems. But because of differences between US and other major powers, many countries did not sign these declarations, including India. India also didn't sign the declaration on the autonomous weapon systems. But the other statements focusing on sustainability and environmental friendliness, and as well as inclusivity, these were widely adopted at the Paris summit. So now in 2026, with India being the chair, India had a fantastic opportunity in front of it to not just be a participant in global AI governance, but to set the agenda and lead the global narrative to ensure that we shape an inclusive framework, a framework which can include the concerns of all the stakeholders and ensure that AI is primarily focused on empowering the weak, ensuring that the diffusion of AI across the world is democratic in nature, designed to benefit the weaker sections, the weaker countries, and as well as the vulnerable population. So essentially, India's focus was on inclusive AI and principles of equity to ensure that the global south would benefit. India also had the goal of building greater trust in AI systems, given the safety risks associated with AI and the various concerns that are attached to it. India had this huge challenge, an enormous task to build greater trust in AI systems bring the global community together, and ensure that AI technologies focus on inclusivity and equity. So, for India, democratizing AI, ensuring that all powers, irrespective of their developmental status, have access to the benefits of AI, is something that was a priority for India. So, India has pushed for this agenda at the AI Impact Summit to ensure that AI technologies remain relevant even for the global south, for developing underdeveloped countries, ensuring that the LLMs which are being rolled out, the large language model, generative AI, chatbots, and tools, ensuring that they benefit the global south to prevent a form of digital colonialism. Because today, technology related to AI is largely concentrated in the hands of just a few powers: US, China, and some of the other countries. So, India's goal was to ensure that there is greater focus on democratization over access to the benefits of AI. And India projected itself as a very attractive destination for manufacturing related to AI technologies, for development of AI algorithms. India is very ambitious and very bullish about the sector, with the government itself investing a lot of effort and money into the domain, be it under the National Semiconductor Mission and the India AI mission. The government is very actively building the infrastructure base for semiconductor manufacturing and fabrication. India is working out deals to secure access to critical minerals and other essential raw materials. India is building the entire stack that is needed, including a government owned, a public owned AI infrastructure with around 38,000 GPUs, where the government is leasing out these facilities at very cheap and reasonable cost for AI startups in the country. So, prioritizing India as a destination for AI investments, for AI driven manufacturing, is something that was a priority for India. So, all in all, India's goal was to ensure that AI serves the larger social good, to ensure that AI is rolled out and deployed with focus being on the principle of equity, to ensure everyone has equitable access to the benefits, irrespective of class, irrespective of the status of a nation, and ensuring that the growth that comes out of AI is inclusive. So, with these priorities in mind, India went into the AI Impact Summit, which witnessed very widespread participation from global leaders to tech leaders to several industries and tech companies and startups. The event attracted massive attention within India. There was a very huge crowd of more than 5 lakh people, right, who attended and participated in the AI Impact Summit over 5 days. So now let's look at the outcomes. The government, which issued a joint statement along with the New Delhi Declaration, it has claimed that around $250 billion worth of investments were mobilized during the AI Impact Summit. See, usually such numbers, you need to be skeptical about it, because some of the announcements that would have been made, usually by private companies, some of it would be existing investments which they had already accounted for, or some of it may never, it may not be realized in practice. But conservatively, even if you tone down the number by half, bring it down to, let's say, even $125 billion, if the summit helps in translating investments worth $125 billion into India, that would still be a massive achievement. And there has been an announcement that the government with the private industry would be mobilizing $20 billion worth of commitments for deep tech research, focusing on the core areas of AI and related critical emerging technologies. So, this is something which could really transform India's technological base. India even announced the formal entry into the Pax Silica initiative, which is a US led initiative launched in December 2025 to build resilient supply chains for semiconductors, for all the key raw materials, including critical minerals that are needed for the AI industry. The US has roped all its trusted partners from Australia, Canada to UK, Israel, Singapore, Japan, and Taiwan. All these key players are brought under it, including Netherlands, then Qatar and UAE, along with now India, which was invited in January. And India has now formally accepted the invite. So, this supply chain initiative, focusing on semiconductors, critical minerals, It's essentially projected as an alternative to China controlled and China dominated supply chains. Since there is an over concentration of China's dominance, there is a very big disproportionate role that China plays in the world of critical minerals, from mining to processing to refinement. China plays a disproportionate role in the world of semiconductor chips, right? Same with the world of AI as well. And the whole focus here is to reduce that dependency, cut the risks associated with China, as China is known to leverage economic advantages for geopolitical leverage. So, this is a US led alliance comprising primarily of Western advanced economies and close US allies and trusted partners in order to create these alternate supply chains to reduce their overall dependency on China controlled supply chains. So, this could immensely benefit India as well, with India gaining access to key raw materials, including critical minerals, gaining access to key technologies. India could even contribute to the initiative with its huge and cheap and skilled labor market. India could even be a huge market for silicon chips, and India could emerge as a key manufacturer and fabricator of semiconductor chips. But of course, there are downside risks attached as well. Experts fear that since the group is largely dominated by US and its allies and developed countries and rich industrial economies, this could create a disadvantage for India, as India is the only developing country in PAC Silica initiative. It might essentially bring pressure on India to align with Western or American interests. It could possibly threaten India's strategic autonomy. It could simply push India from being dependent on China to being dependent on US and Western led alliances. So those concerns remain, but still India believes that joining the PAC Silica initiative could be much more beneficial, as it would help India to move away from China controlled supply chains. So this was one key outcome. Now, when you look at the New Delhi Declaration itself, when you look at the final statement that was signed by all the major powers, 85 important countries have signed it with three international organizations. And even leading AI powers like US, China, even France, and many others have signed on to the New Delhi Declaration. So, when you look at the New Delhi Declaration, it perfectly aligns with India's goal of multilateral AI regulation. India believes in the multilateral scheme of things. India wants to ensure that the control over AI, the regulatory framework, is as diversified as possible. India doesn't want the control levers to be in the hands of just few powers like US and China. In that regard, the New Delhi Declaration has taken the right step. What India has done is India, as the chair of the summit, pushed for non binding, voluntary commitments. Because at any global conclave, when you try to push for legally binding commitments, usually countries become hesitant, they back off because they see that as a threat to their sovereignty and their national interests. So, generally, in such multilateral platforms, voluntary non binding commitments are more willingly accepted, and countries will even later try to strive to achieve them and try to adopt them. So, India carefully and very tactfully pushed only for voluntary non binding commitments. This in itself was a very big step from the Indian side to ensure that we build consensus amongst all the differing partners. So, as a result, India was able to champion the vision of democratic diffusion of AI, ensuring that even small countries, weak and developing, underdeveloped nations from global south, will eventually get access to AI technologies. And the benefits of AI is something which is coded into the New Delhi Declaration. So, a global AI impact commons has been set up, which is basically going to be a database consisting of use cases, the practical applications of AI. So, other countries can draw inspiration from it. So, a global AI impact commons will come up as a database consisting of successful use cases of AI, how it can help in socio-economic transformation. So, other countries and other developers can draw inspiration from those models. Then the countries have agreed to set up a trusted AI commons. This would be a repository, again, a sort of a database of all the tools, resources that are required, the standards and benchmarks and best practices, which countries can try to follow and replicate. Let's say leading powers like US or UK have championed new models of artificial intelligence and its applications. So on the trusted AI commons, so some of the proprietary technologies would be listed here as open source uh, technologies, which is accessible to all the countries, from where you can learn the best practices and try to follow those standards and benchmarks which have been laid down. So in a way, it's something similar to Creative Commons or Global Commons, where advanced economies, which are pioneering AI research, they will set aside some share of AI technologies and standards and protocols and make it accessible to everyone as open source technologies to drive the larger benefits so that AI would eventually become inclusive and equitable. Another important announcement was the International Network for AI Science Institutions. So this would be a global network to connect research and academic institutions across the world, to bring together R&D centers in public and private domain and connect research institutions across the world. Then there has been an announcement for a AI social empowerment platform. This global platform would exclusively focus on the socio-economic benefits of AI, and it would assist the countries to try and draw the benefits of AI to achieve socio-economic transformation. Then AI workforce development playbook and reskilling principles. So this would again be a global playbook, sort of a blue book of sorts, which would provide few guiding principles for training the manpower, for upskilling the existing workforce so that the labor market is ready for the upcoming changes because of AI and they can adapt to the changes, upskill themselves, and in a way contribute to the larger development and adoption of AI. Then a guiding principle on resilient and efficient AI. So these were the big outcomes of the New Delhi Declaration. See, this is a topic you can definitely expect a mains question on. So you need to be able to discuss the background, the role of India in acting as a leader, and the key outcomes of the New Delhi Declaration. Coming to my last point, at the AI Impact Summit, a lot of investments were announced within India by private companies. Domestic companies like Reliance, Adani, they have committed 10 lakh crores worth of domestic investments in AI. But again, there's no specific details provided or timelines, but these are broad commitments, which itself is quite huge. It again goes on to show how the big players in the Indian industry are prioritizing artificial intelligence. Then Indian AI startups, especially Sarvam, which is a Bengaluru based AI startup, it rolled out India's first multi-billion parameter LLM, a large language model with benchmark performance comparable to other global models, including the likes of OpenAI's ChatGPT, DeepSeek of China, etc. On certain parameters, it has even matched the performance and sometimes even outperformed the other global LLMs as claimed by the founders of the company. So this itself is a big step for India's AI industry. And along with that, the new collaborations that were announced between the big tech of US and Indian companies, the Indian IT software giants. See, when AI tools like Claude and Cowork were rolled out, it triggered huge alarm across the IT industry, and the stocks of IT companies crashed across the world. So companies like TCS, Wipro, Infosys, they took a massive hit. I'm sure all of you must be aware of this. So now we are seeing a collaboration developing between the cutting edge AI companies from the US with Indian software giants. This was very evident at the AI Impact Summit. OpenAI has entered into a deal with Tata Group of India. It would even make use of Tata's Hyper Vault, which is a massive data center capacity, and they would be cooperating with each other, working together, creating new opportunities for the Indian tech firm. Then Infosys has entered into a deal with Anthropic. So this is a fresh breath of air for India's IT industry. Google has doubled down on its investments and commitments. It's pumping almost $15 billion into the Indian AI market. Google has also committed to lay a dedicated submarine cable linking India and US to provide for high data bandwidth for mega AI projects, which will come up in India and US. So these were some of the big private sector investments that were announced. Of course, the event was marred by some controversy as well. There were accusations of very poor organization by the organizers. They couldn't handle the crowd, and some events were not well planned. The overall amenities were not well managed. and attempts were made to even tarnish India's image, particularly by few vested interests. I'm sure you must know which media outlets I'm talking about. There are few global media organizations which constantly try to defame India by taking every minor incident and trying to project it as India's failure. But what really added trouble or created challenges for India was the embarrassing incident involving the Galgotias University and the robo dog that they displayed, claiming it as their own invention when it was just a Chinese product which was being showcased. So the inability of the organizers to keep a check on this is something which caused a lot of embarrassment. But of course, it was still one tangential issue. But few global media outlets have deliberately focused and highlighted only on this to try and tarnish India's image and continue their age old propaganda against India. There were other critical developments which happened, political protests led by the opposition parties, which came in for criticism by the ruling party. So there were a few minor tangential setbacks. But irrespective of that, I think India has done phenomenally well in leading this summit to a successful conclusion and bringing out a consensus amongst the participants and adopting the New Delhi Declaration. But of course, eventually it will all depend on to what extent it will be followed up and implemented, and what would be the next course for the global AI regulatory framework. So, based on what we have understood, please take up a mains question and practice your answer writing. Now, let's move on to the next topic. On page 13, there's a very, very important article that's relevant for polity under GS2 and as well as internal security under GS3. So, this is related to the establishment of the Frontier Nagaland Territorial Authority, FNTA, that provides for devolution of powers for eastern parts of Nagaland. This is a topic which we had briefly covered a couple of weeks ago, but now we can go a little deep into the topic, understand why the devolution of powers was necessary for the eastern parts of Nagaland, why this new administrative authority has been set up, the Frontier Nagaland Territorial Authority. See, on the 5th of Feb, a major tripartite agreement was signed between the central government, represented by the nodal ministry, the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is responsible for center state relations, internal security, along with the state government of Nagaland, and a civil society organization called ENPO, the Eastern Nagaland People's Organization, that represents the political interests and demands of the tribes, the Naga tribes of Eastern Nagaland. So, this tripartite agreement involving three stakeholders, the central government, that is the Home Ministry, the state government of Nagaland, and ENPO, which is a civil society group representing the political demands and interests of the Naga tribes of Eastern Nagaland. So, this agreement has provided for the creation of a dedicated regional authority, a governance authority essentially, with its own set of delegated powers and limited autonomy on the ground. So this establishes the FNTA, the Frontier Nagaland Territorial Authority. So why was this needed? What were the demands of the people of Eastern Nagaland? That is something we need to understand. Now, please look at the map here. I want you to concentrate. See, the state of Nagaland that we have today, right? It was carved out of the larger state of Assam in 1963. Nagaland, that is the Naga inhabited areas, were carved out and formed as a separate state in 1963. It was a direct response to contain the Naga insurgency, which was then led by the Naga National Council, or NNC, which had started an insurgent separatist war against India right from India's independence in 1947. Naga insurgency was the first major insurgency that India dealt with post independence. In fact, the Naga insurgency dates back to the colonial times. The demands for a separate nation for the Nagas had existed during the British days, during the British era as well. So, post independence, when India was dealing with Naga insurgency, there was a need to contain the resentment and the demands. And India made a concession by carving out the Naga areas as a separate state from the larger state of Assam and established the state of Nagaland. though it did not help in curbing Naga insurgency, and the insurgency continued with new groups like NSCN and different factions of NSCN from 1980s onwards. The people of Eastern Nagaland, they had a different set of demands that they were bringing up. While Naga insurgency was happening on one side parallelly, there were few specific tribes or sub clans of Nagas in Eastern Nagaland who had a separate set of demands and aspirations. This again goes back to the British era. See, in colonial India, the British had extended their administrative control for the western parts of Nagaland, which includes the current capital, Kohima. And you can see here in the map, this primarily constitutes the western part of Nagaland, where British administrative authority had extended. So this was under British administration. But the eastern parts, which constituted the frontier territory that shared borders with the then colony of Burma, which today is our neighboring country of Myanmar. These frontier areas, which are primarily hilly areas, remote and inaccessible areas, they were not brought under British administration. They were kept as a separate administrative entity with very little governance and development efforts by the British government in India. So, this region was largely ignored and neglected as a frontier region. Though western parts of Nagaland was under British control and administration, saw some sort of investments and development, eastern parts of Nagaland, the frontier areas bordering Burma, which is today's Myanmar, these hilly areas were largely kept aside, treated separately, and the region did not see much development. So, post independence, India inherited these regions. And the hilly districts which are present here in eastern Nagaland, Kipre, Longleng, Mon, Noklak, Shamator, and Tungsang, these six eastern districts, they fell behind with regard to their development and their political progress. So the people here, they comprise of subclans of Nagas. There are around 8 specific Naga tribes that inhabit these 6 eastern frontier districts. So they have felt that they have been politically alienated. They have been ignored, neglected. Post independence, they still have that resentment that even the Indian government hasn't done much uh, focused development in this region. So, as a result, the aspiration for separate governance has existed in eastern Nagaland. Though the tribes here did not take up violent insurgency or separatism, they started expressing their political demand, especially from 2010. They started presenting these formal memorandums to the central government, expressing their desire for separate statehood. So the demand of the people of Eastern Nagaland has not been for independence from India. It has never been about a separatist movement. It has been with regard to carving out this region from the larger state of Nagaland, as they have differences with the other Naga tribes of Western Nagaland. This is primarily an internal issue of Nagaland, where there has been a clear administrative and developmental and political divide between the Naga subclans of western parts of Nagaland and eastern parts of Nagaland. So the ENPO, which was formed, the Eastern Nagaland People's Organization, has been acting as the representative of these 6 backward districts, calling for the creation of a separate state within India under the ambit of the Indian Constitution. But they wanted this region to be carved out as a separate state from Nagaland. So essentially, it was a statehood movement, something that India has seen across Northeast India and in other parts of the country as well. But however, to try and contain the aspirations and demands, India initially tried providing a developmental package. A few years ago, the Home Ministry with the state government, they tried mobilizing around 500 crore rupee package to provide for focused development, hoping that this would satisfy the demands of the ENPO and the people of Eastern Nagaland. But this did not yield any results. In fact, in the 2024 elections, when the Lok Sabha elections were held, the ENPO gave a boycott call, and it has such a strong influence in the region that voting didn't really take place in eastern parts of Nagaland. There was a significant impact on voter participation, and this became a serious concern, not just a political administrative concern, but very soon it would become a security concern. Because as you saw in the map, these frontier areas, the 6 districts I showed you, they share the sensitive border with Myanmar. The India-Myanmar border is already highly porous because of all the natural gaps that are present, because of the hilly mountainous terrain, the dense forests, and the remote inaccessible regions. Plus, Nagas are connected across the border. There are subclans of Nagas in Myanmar as well. And some of the Naga insurgent groups connected to the NSCN and different factions of NSCN, they operate across the border in Myanmar. There are multiple other Northeast insurgent groups, including ULFA and the others, which have a nexus with organized crime, such as drug trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking. So, the presence of these security challenges is something that worried India when ENPO gave a call to boycott the Lok Sabha elections. That is something India can't afford in a frontier region, that too along a sensitive border like the border with Myanmar. So since then, the government reached out sincerely to the ENPO, started engaging in talks with them, and it showed the willingness to take the middle path, to work out a innovative solution to satisfy the demands of the people of Eastern Nagaland. So that led to the tripartite agreement through which limited autonomy is being devolved and delegated to a local territorial authority which is being established. So under the tripartite agreement, limited autonomy is being granted with the establishment of FNTA, the Frontier Nagaland Territorial Authority, which will now administer and govern these 6 districts of Eastern Nagaland. So it will have its own jurisdiction and set of powers and authority. So this is basically a devolution of administrative and financial powers in specific areas. Around 46 subjects have been identified. Subjects like land use, for example, subjects like rural development, subjects like agriculture, local infrastructure, even local tribal customs and practices. So 46 specific subjects have been identified under which the FNTA will exercise administrative and financial authority, which would be separate from the authority of the state government of Nagaland. It essentially reduces the control of the state government of Nagaland to some extent, granting some limited autonomy to the regional body, to the territorial authority which is coming up. So it will have its own mini secretariat, like how state governments have a secretariat in the state capital. So obviously for government of Nagaland, the secretariat would be in Kohima. So there would be a mini secretariat established in Eastern Nagaland with funding from Home Ministry. The MHA would provide the funds to set up this mini secretariat, which would be headed by a high ranking officer, most likely of the rank of additional chief secretary, would be heading this authority, which would comprise of local leaders from the 8 local Naga tribes who will look after their own administration under these 46 subjects, which have now been devolved to the FNTA. So this is not constitutional autonomy under 6th schedule. This is not even a proper legal autonomy through a law. This is essentially devolution of authority through an agreement between the stakeholders. So this shows the flexibility of the Indian state to accommodate the aspirations and demands of different regions and sections of the society in order to contain any major risk factors. Because if you don't address those demands, allow them to fester, it could easily turn into a widespread separatist movement, turning into insurgencies and triggering a security challenge for India. Because across Northeast region, we have seen many such similar developments in the past. If you look at the movements of, let's say, Tripura-based insurgent outfits, or Mizo insurgency, or if you look at Bodo insurgency and Ulfa's insurgency, there are many such examples, right? So India, along with tackling insurgency through hardcore security operations, also focuses on talks, engagement, and India has found such middle path and solutions through negotiations, even without resorting to any use of force. Because NPO's demand and movement was never violent. It was always a political movement, and India has tried to address those demands as much as possible within the limits that are available to the government under the constitution. However, this devolution which has been done will not affect the constitutional special status that Nagaland enjoys under Article 371, Clause A. Under Article 371, Clause A, Nagaland has some special provisions to protect the customary laws and tribal practices of the various tribes in Nagaland. So these special provisions, they have not been abrogated. It has not been touched. So without compromising on this constitutional guarantee and protection, a certain degree of autonomy has been provided to Eastern Nagaland. So that is the key development that you need to note down. Now, one last point. Can you compare this with what's happening in Manipur? Can we apply the same model to Manipur? Because see, India's such peace agreements and granting some autonomy, it has worked with various groups and entities. For example, some tribal areas, hill districts have been given constitutional autonomy under the sixth schedule of the Indian Constitution. If you look at Assam, right, the Karbi Anglong region, for example, right, the local native insurgency which was there was effectively tackled, and India managed to address the concerns by providing constitutional autonomy under sixth schedule. So similarly, we've dealt with many other developments from statehood movement to separatist movements. India has dealt with them quite effectively, and showing this willingness to devolve powers and grant more autonomy and authority has been a time-tested practice to address these local aspirations. Now the question is, can we apply this model to Manipur, where there is ethnic violence, which has been raging since 2023 between the majority Metis and the minority Kuki-Zo community. So the article says definitely the model can be replicated. This is a lesson. In the Kuki areas where there's a demand for a separate union territory, if not a separate UT, maybe India can consider a similar sort of autonomy with the establishment of a territorial authority for the Kuki-Zo region, where local autonomy would be granted with the establishment of a separate territorial authority. But however, there might be many roadblocks to this. See, in Nagaland, things were different. The equations were different. The state government, under the current chief minister, was more than willing to devolve the powers. There was no resistance from Western Nagaland. Also, there was no inter-group rivalry and clashes amongst the Nagas from Western and Eastern Nagaland. So there was no violence as such present on the ground, and the state government under the current incumbent chief minister was more than willing to be a part of the devolution process. But that's not the case in Manipur. In Manipur, you have the Imphal Valley where the Metis are concentrated, the majority Metis, and the Manipur government is often alleged or accused of aligning with Metis interests. It's often accused of targeting the Kuki-Zos. But of course, there are counter allegations as well. The Manipur government and Metis accuse the Kuki-Zo community of being outsiders, uh, of having links with drug traffickers, of enabling cross-border infiltration, and there is some element of truth in those allegations as well. So, given the complexity of the ethnic divide in Manipur, and given the fact that the Manipur government itself is not very keen on this, is something which would complicate those things. Also, in Manipur, please understand there is a third player, the Nagas. In Manipur Hills, it's not just the Kuki-Zo community you will find. You have the Nagas and some insurgent outfits, such as factions of NSCN, which operate in the Naga areas, which also claim these parts of Manipur. So there is a third entity as well. You can't simply carve out the region and give some local autonomy to the Kuki-Zo community. It will face stiff resistance from Metis, from the Manipur government itself, and as well as from Nagas, and there are insurgents such as NSCN factions which are operating here. So in Manipur, the situation is much more complex, though the model does offer a way forward to resolve the situation in Manipur. So please take up this mains practice question, and from what we have discussed, try to write a good answer for the question. Now moving on, there's another important article related to the Chagos archipelago, or the Chagos group of islands that's located in the Indian Ocean region. Recently, Donald Trump has triggered fresh controversy by criticizing Britain or United Kingdom for being foolish to give up its rights over the Chagos Islands. So this brings this small, sensitive piece of island that's located in the Indian Ocean into limelight. So let's quickly understand where the Chagos Islands are located. Why is it so critical? and what connect does India have with this particular issue? See, the Chagos archipelago is located in the central part of Indian Ocean region, almost in the middle between East Africa and Southeast Asia. So it occupies a very strategic location right in between the vital trade routes and shipping lanes. So over here you have an underwater mountain ridge, the Chagos Lakadiv Ridge, that runs from here towards Lakshadweep Islands of India. So on the Lakadiv Ridge, you have multiple coral atolls which form the different landforms from Maldives to the Chagosian Islands to some islands of Lakshadweep as well. They're essentially coral atolls sitting on the underwater Chagos Lakadiv Ridge. So for many, many centuries, the Chagos group of islands located here in the Indian Ocean, they were uninhabited. It had no native human population. It was first discovered by the Portuguese. It was first discovered by the Portuguese. This was in the 16th century. And of course, they tried colonizing it. Eventually, it was passed down to the French. France took it from the Portuguese. This included the territories of Mauritius and all its dependencies that are located in the nearby region. The Chagos group historically has been seen as part of Mauritius, and Seychelles was also part of the same setup. So the term Mauritius and its dependencies included the main island of Mauritius, as well as Seychelles and the Chagos group of islands that are present here. So first colonized with the Portuguese, then taken over by France in 18th century. So there's very interesting history behind it. So the French, who had taken control of Mauritius and its dependencies, later it was lost by the French to United Kingdom. So Britain gained control over these French colonies that existed in the Indian Ocean, and they all had a strategic location in the IOR region. So in 1814, Britain proclaimed all these islands as part of one entity, labeling them as Mauritius and its dependencies under the Treaty of Paris. Later in 1903, Britain separated Seychelles by detaching it from the Mauritius and its dependencies, which remained a British colony, while Seychelles remained a separate and distinct British colony. So eventually, as Britain was decolonizing, as national independence movements were gaining ground across the world, though Britain left Mauritius and Seychelles eventually, it never granted full independence to the Chagos group. Though Mauritius became independent in 1968, Seychelles also gained independence. The Chagos group of islands were never granted independence, and Britain retained it as British Indian Ocean Territory, as an overseas territory of Britain. So there are at least 14 such remaining British colonies across the world. Even France is no less. France also maintains such overseas territories in Indian Ocean and even in the Pacific Ocean. So Britain retained Chagos as part of its overseas territory in the Indian Ocean, known as BIOT. Now, I told you initially there was no native population here, but the colonizers, the Portuguese first, then the French, then the British, they brought laborers from Africa, primarily African slaves, and also the laborers from India, the plantation workers, the indentured laborers from India. So the descendants of these Africans and Indians, they often interbred, and they are considered as the indigenous population, referred to as the Chagosians. The descendants of the African Indian workers who were settled here by the colonizers, they are considered as the natives of the Chagos group, referred to as a Chagosian population. So post World War II, when Britain was decolonizing, they retained control of Chagos, made it a British Indian Ocean territory, and they evicted all the native Chagosian population. They entered into a deal with United States, and the strategic Diogo Garcia, which is the largest island in the Chagos group, it was turned into a frontline military base that Britain leased to United States, and they jointly operated this massive military facility. It remains one of the key forward positions of the US armed forces. So there are both British and American military assets deployed over here. There is a huge airbase and a runway facility which can accommodate even large transport planes, including fighter jets. There is a deep sea port that can accommodate large naval vessels, aircraft carriers, and submarines, even nuclear powered submarines. There's a huge ammunition depot. Then advanced surveillance and communication sites and assets are deployed. Even private contractors are allowed to deploy their assets on Diego Garcia. So this is one of the leading military bases for the NATO, and particularly for US and United Kingdom. So the question of its sovereignty and the rights of the Chagosians has always been a matter of dispute. Most Chagosians, they were driven out from here. They were resettled either in Seychelles or in Mauritius. Some of them, they even managed to settle in United Kingdom. So this was the status of the Chagos group, where the native population was driven out. The colonizers had fully exploited it. Britain retained its sovereignty, and though it was supposed to be made part of Mauritius post independence, it was never given back to Mauritius. Britain retained it as part of its own overseas territory, worked with the US, leased Diego Garcia to the US, and turned it into a vital strategic military base. But however, the matter was brought up for litigation. In the year 2000, the matter was taken up by the British courts, where it clearly held that British colonization of Chagosian land is blatantly illegal. But this was reversed by the British Parliament in 2008 by the House of Lords. But the pressure was building up. The native Chagosians, who were rallying more support with the help of the government of Mauritius. Mauritius had become very determined to take back this territory and to resettle the Chagosian population. So the native Chagosians, who are now dispersed across the world, from UK to Seychelles to Mauritius, they fought the legal battle with the backing of the government of Mauritius, and the matter reached the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. See, ICJ, which is a primary organ of the UN, can handle two types of cases. It can take up litigation cases or disputes between member states of the UN. So, in such cases, the ruling of ICJ is legally binding. It has to be followed and implemented, it has to be enforced. Any country violating it could face action from the UN, including economic sanctions. The other type of case taken by ICJ is advisory cases, where legal advice is given out for uh, global organizations and other entities. But this is non binding in nature. Advisory opinion is obviously non binding in nature. So, when the matter reached the ICJ in 2019, the ICJ ruled against the process of decolonization. It pointed out that such continued colonization of former territories is illegal under international law, and it recommended to United Kingdom to stop administering Chagos, return it back to Mauritius, and ensure the return of the native Chagosian population. So this created some global diplomatic pressure. Though it's not legally binding, it was just an advisory opinion. It started adding weight to the demand of Mauritius and the Chagosian population, and even India started backing Mauritius because India is directly connected to this. The Chagosians are essentially of Indian origin, right? They are of Indian and African descent. In Mauritius, nearly 70% of the country's population are of Indian origin. Majority of them, they are descendants of the Indian workers who were transported here by the British. Plus, Mauritius is a very key friend of India, a very critical country in our immediate neighborhood. And we share fantastic relations with Mauritius. So, India, along with many countries from global south, especially from Africa, they backed the demand of Mauritius. This started building international pressure on UK. So, what UK did, it started negotiating with Mauritius from 2022 onwards. And they finalized an agreement in 2024, which has been signed in 2025. The talks were initially led by then British PM Rishi Sunak, who's also of African Indian descent. And It was finalized by Keir Starmer last year. So the agreement between Britain and Mauritius has now been signed, through which the Chagos group would entirely be given back to Mauritius as part of the sovereignty of Mauritius. And this includes the largest island, Diogo Garcia, where the American British military base is located. But however, as part of the deal, Britain will take Diogo Garcia on lease, a long term lease of 99 years, by paying roughly £100 million every year to the government of Mauritius as a lease amount. This will allow for the return of the Chagosian population as well. The Chagosian people can now start returning. They can settle in all the other islands except for Diogo Garcia. Diogo Garcia will remain off limits. Chagosians and civilians cannot be settled in Diogo Garcia. This is not allowed under the deal. It will continue to remain a British American military base, but all the other small islets, they can be inhabited with the return of the Chagosian population. And Britain will pay £100 million per year roughly for a 99-year lease, with a total expenditure estimated at nearly £3.4 billion. Now, this seems like a fair deal where Mauritius gets back sovereignty, Chagosians can return except for Diogo Garcia, and Diogo Garcia will remain a British American military base. But however, Donald Trump doesn't think so. Donald Trump has called this decision of Britain to be an act of stupidity, right? A classic way of Donald Trump expressing his views. Donald Trump has tried equating this with the Greenland question, and he has started bringing pressure on Britain to not bring this deal into force. See, this agreement that was signed last year, it has still not taken effect. It will only take effect after it is ratified by the parliaments on both sides. So a bill has to be pushed in the British Parliament. The process is currently going on. It has to be eventually passed and ratified. Only then the treaty will come into effect and Mauritius will gain full sovereignty of Chagos. Britain will decolonize and only retain Diogo Garcia as a leased military base. But none of this will take effect if the ratification does not go through. So before it takes effect, the US is now exerting pressure under Donald Trump, criticizing British action, labeling it as an act of stupidity as to why are you giving up a strategic location, as though they claim ownership and they have ownership over it. This again is purely a reflection of colonial imperial mindset of Western powers, especially United States, under leaders like Donald Trump. So that remains a point of concern for people of Mauritius, the Chagosian population who have fought for this right for decades. Remains a concern for India as well, as this has implications for Indian interests. See, India wants to be the primary leading power in the Indian Ocean. This is our strategic backyard. We don't want any external power poking their nose around in the Indian Ocean. Diogo Garcia has been a point of concern for India in the past, though now it helps India to counter China and keep a check on China's military deployment. India does have long-term concerns about continued British and American military presence. So, if the issue were to flare up again, it would create difficult choices for India. So that is something you need to be aware of. We need to continue to track the story as well. And if you ask me, why did Britain agree to the deal in the first place? See, Britain had a very rational argument. If they had not worked out the deal, the international pressure would have grown to such an extent that probably ICJ would have passed a legally binding judgment. What if Mauritius filed a proper litigation suit against UK by invoking the provisions of the UN Charter? Then most definitely ICJ would have ruled against colonization. It would have called this illegal and it would have ordered Britain to decolonize Chagos. That was always a risk, which meant Britain would lose access to Diogo Garcia as well, which meant US would also lose access to the military base. So to prevent this from happening, to avoid a legally binding judgment from the International Court of Justice, and to further avoid the buildup of international pressure and momentum against Britain, this preemptive move was taken up. They struck a deal, promised a good sum of money for Mauritius, gave back the sovereignty, allowed Chagosians to return while retaining the strategic military base, which is what they want. But Trump thinks it's a stupid deal, right? So that is something you need to know about the Chagos group. Now, coming to the next topic, again related to Mr. Donald Trump. Yesterday, we spoke about the Supreme Court's ruling in the United States, which has struck down the tariffs that Trump had levied against all countries, including India. So now, we even discussed yesterday how Trump can use other legislative routes. So the previous tariffs that were levied, they were under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. So now the US Supreme Court has said president has no executive authority to step into the domain of tariffs using this extraordinary law, because that is the domain of the US Congress, not the president. So it has clearly declared this as unconstitutional. But however, the president still has plenty of options, as I discussed yesterday itself, under the Trade Act and also under the Trade Expansion Act and the Tariffs Act. The US president can continue to levy different sets of tariffs. So we discussed yesterday that under the Trade Act, Trump had already announced a 10% tariff that will be levied for 150 days as a common tariff for all the countries. Since Trump's reciprocal tariffs were completely made redundant by the Supreme Court's ruling, right? Trump brought out a new set of 10% tariffs for 150 days under the provisions of the Trade Act. See, this allows the US president to levy such tariffs to deal with a balance of payments crisis situation or any abnormalcy in trade by levying surcharges and other tariffs. So here, the maximum tariff the president can levy is 15%. For some reason, the US officials didn't think of this. So first, Trump announced a 10% tariff, and within 24 hours, they've reversed and changed it to the maximum limit, which is allowed, that is 15%. So yesterday we discussed that Trump has now signed an order under the Trade Act for 10% tariffs. Now this has increased to 15%, which is the maximum allowed limit under the Trade Act, and it will continue for 150 days. Then under the Trade Expansion Act, there are specific tariffs which are already there for specific sectors like steel and aluminum. So these tariffs will continue. See, India has been affected by such tariffs because steel aluminum exports is a key export of India into the US market. Amongst all our exports, this is the fourth biggest basket. Steel and aluminum exports constitutes the fourth biggest export for India. So Indian exports in steel aluminum sector have already been targeted with tariffs under the Trade Expansion Act, and this will continue. This is not going to stop, right? But now the question is, initially US had placed 25% plus 25% penalty tariff on India, a total of 50% tariffs, correct? Now, as part of the interim trade deal that was announced, which is yet to be signed, the tariffs were to come down to 18%. But now the Supreme Court, which has intervened, has struck down the initial tariffs that were imposed. So this has no validity at all. So in that case, there won't be a need for a trade deal. Since this takes immediate effect, the tariffs are now back to the pre-Trump era. Whatever tariffs existed, it was supposed to come back to the pre-Trump era. That's why the Trump administration has brought out this additional 15% tariff, the new 15% tariff, so that countries like India would at least face 15% tariffs till they find other solutions. So for India, this is slightly good news. From 18% proposed under the interim trade agreement, 15% is definitely much better. And this applies uniformly for all trade partners of the US, right? But however, there is a bigger concern here. What will happen to all the trade deals? They're as good as useless in a way. See, US, which had levied such high tariffs on many trade partners, it struck trade deals with all of them. US had a trade deal with European Union, with UK, with Japan, right? With South Korea, Vietnam, Philippines, then the proposed trade deal with India. All these agreements would probably become irrelevant if the Supreme Court's decision stands, and whatever Trump does, right, they will find other legal options, as I said, under Trade Act and other laws. But irrespective of that, the trade agreement could largely become inconsequential in a way. But again, it is too premature to completely write off these trade agreements as well. So governments across the world, they are waiting and watching, right? They're going through the Supreme Court's ruling and they want to see how US would react, how the Trump administration would play this out. And Indian side is also now exercising caution because in case the Supreme Court's ruling will hold and Trump's administration finds it difficult to bring new tariffs, then most likely we would end up facing only 15% tariff. Then there's no need for the deal, which was bringing tariffs at 18%. So within India, there is a lot of discussion, debate, and pressure on the government as well to go slow on the interim agreement and wait and watch and read the signs from the US correctly and then take a call on signing the interim trade agreement. So it has implications for all the trade deals that US has worked out uh, following the tariffs under Donald Trump. So what does it mean for the trade talks? As of now, there's no clarity on that. It has even created lot of confusion as well, but it is widely welcomed by markets, right? Because it is a move which strengthens American constitution and democracy. It basically keeps the executive under check. It shows that the judiciary can still rein in a irrational president, and that gives more confidence to the markets with regard to credibility and stability. But what will happen to the refunds? US has already collected huge amounts of tariffs to the tune of 130 to 200 billion dollars, right? The importers who have paid the tariffs or any other entity who has incurred that additional cost, they will of course try to litigate this. They will raise this with US customs, right? There is a way of getting the money back. But if US will insist that they'll not give the refund, given the sum is quite massive, and if Trump administration considers this as an embarrassment, right? If they try to block the refunds, then the court litigations might basically drag for months and years. And this could even have a cascading economic effect, as many traders and importers and companies will fight over the refunds, leading to new cases and litigations against the US government. It would end up creating more uncertainty in the trade domain. So, this is something India will have to factor. We need to take it a little slow because under the interim trade agreement, it was earlier announced that by March we would be signing the deal. But now we need to account for the new developments and wait and watch as to how US would react and what other changes could happen. It's very fluid right now. So it's better India doesn't commit to anything as of now and try and push the signing of the interim trade agreement and then take a call based on India's national interests. Coming to the next development, India Brazil relations. Yesterday, I gave you a good introduction to India Brazil ties. So now we can talk about the key agreements and deals and outcomes from the visit of Brazilian President Lula da Silva. So the Brazilian leader Lula da Silva was in India for the AI Impact Summit. And along with that, India Brazil relations, they have been discussed and taken forward by both the leaders. A lot of important agreements have been signed. I want you to make a note of this. India Brazil have agreed to more than double the trade because there's a lot of trade potential as we discussed yesterday. The current trade volume is roughly $15 billion. And previously, they had set a target of achieving $20 billion trade by 2030. But this is a very low target they had set for themselves. So now both governments have signed a new deal to take forward the trade partnership and they have revised the target. They want to double it and increase the trade volume to more than $30 billion by 2030. So it's a very ambitious goal they have set for themselves. They've also signed an agreement in the field of critical minerals and rare earths. Brazil does have deposits of critical minerals and rare earths. Agreements have been signed in the field of defense, energy. Brazil is a key energy supplier. It has hydrocarbon deposits. We have close defense relations. We have close ties in the healthcare sector. So all these agreements have been signed that covers important sectors. Then they have also brought out an action plan on digital partnership between India and Brazil. An action plan for digital partnership to step up the collaboration in the tech domain that includes artificial intelligence. Then India wants to promote UPI and digital public infrastructure, integrate our payment systems, and help Brazil with the digital public infrastructure that India has built. So there have been deals signed in this regard. Then agreements have been signed in the field of steel mining. Brazil is a major steel producer, and India, Brazil have signed new agreements in this sector as well. So there were many positive outcomes. And of course, they have been pushing for reforms of the UN as both countries are part of G4. They have reiterated their commitment for multilateralism and they are pushing for reforms of the UN, demanding the permanent seat at UN Security Council for the G4 countries, for India, Brazil, Japan, and Germany, which are part of the G4 club. Then apart from this, they have also discussed the policies of Donald Trump, the tariffs of US, because both India and Brazil were hit with 50% tariffs. So that is another area of common interest, how to deal with Trump's presidency and American tariffs and policies. As emerging economies from global south, as members of the BRICS, right, we have common interest, common vision. So that is something which was taken forward during the visit of the Brazilian president. Now, coming to the prelim section, two important articles. Let's take a quick look. On page 6, there's an article referring to the CRPF. Union Home Minister Amit Shah took part in the Raising Day Parade, the 87th Raising Day Parade of the CRPF. So let's quickly understand what is the CRPF, what is its role. The Central Reserve Police Force. It's one of the central armed police forces under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Under the MHA, it's a paramilitary force which is officially designated as a CAPF that plays a crucial role in internal security. The MHA is the nodal ministry for internal security. And CRPF is one of the oldest paramilitary forces of India. Its establishment goes back to the British era. It was initially set up as the Crown Representatives Police, representing the British Crown in 1939. It was mainly set up to target the Indian national movement and to target India's freedom fighters. Post independence, the force reformed itself into a leading security force. And the CRPF has become a key backbone of India's internal security architecture. So it performs a diverse set of roles and duties. The CRPF is designated as the primary anti-Naxal force of India. They are deployed across Naxal affected states to complement the state anti-Naxal units. And it is playing a pivotal role to ensure the goal of Naxal Mukt Bharat by March 2026. CRPF even has a dedicated special force unit called Cobra, Commando Battalion for Resolute Action, which is an elite guerrilla based outfit focusing on guerrilla tactics, jungle warfare tactics, which specializes in anti-Naxal operations. The CRPF even has the Rapid Action Force, RAF, that mainly deals with mob control and riot management. It's a specialist force within the CRPF that specializes in mob control and riot management. Then CRPF is deployed in Jammu and Kashmir, primarily to ensure internal security and also to assist Indian Army in counter-insurgency operations. So it plays both an internal security role to maintain law and order to deal with riots and mobs, and also works with Indian Army to deal with counter-insurgency on the ground. It has been deployed in the Northeast theater as well. Recently in Manipur, when the ethnic violence flared up, CRPF battalions were deployed to maintain law and order. It also plays a critical role in disaster management. It has dedicated battalions that specialize in disaster management, search and rescue operations. It also plays a big role in election management to ensure the security for the electoral process. So it performs a wide variety of functions that strengthens India's internal security. So that is the contribution of the CRPF. Now, coming to the last article for today, India has rolled out an indigenous tetanus vaccine and adult diphtheria vaccine. It's a big development because both tetanus and diphtheria are deadly diseases, especially tetanus. The vaccines that were largely used were imported vaccines, which were slightly costlier as well. Now, the indigenous vaccine developed by the Central Research Institute, Kasauli, Himachal Pradesh, has been officially launched by the government and it will be integrated under the Universal Immunization Program. So I want you to read about tetanus and diphtheria. What are these conditions? What causes them? What's the source for the infection? what are the symptoms, and what's the eventual risk that is associated with these infections. Right? So I've given the basic points over here. You can take a look and please read a little more about tetanus, which causes the deadly lockjaw disease, which is highly fatal. Right? You get infected with Clostridium tetani bacteria, which is found very commonly in soil, in rusted metal objects, in dust. So, whenever you have a major wound or a rupture, it can easily enter your bloodstream, which can cause the infection. That's why when you suffer such injuries, right, when you're playing, you fall, you have a scratch or a bruise, or you scrape yourself against a rusted object, immediately your parents would have rushed you to get a tetanus shot, right? So, that's because it can spread very rapidly, creating the lockjaw condition, which can cause stiffness of the muscle, spasm, which makes it very difficult to swallow and breathe, and eventually it turns fatal. The mortality rate is pretty high. So this is preventable through vaccines, right? Immediately, if you get vaccinated, definitely the condition is preventable, and you need to keep taking regular shots whenever you have such injuries. So now, indigenous variant of the tetanus vaccine has been rolled out, and it will be part of the universal immunization program. Then diphtheria, again a bacterial infection caused by Corynebacterium diphtheriae. It's mainly transmitted either through direct contact with the affected person, or even through respiratory droplets. So air to air transmission is possible, and it has some deadly symptoms again. It can cause very difficult breathing, right? It can affect the throat, the tonsils, causing severe inflammation. You get the feeling of, choking, and becomes very hard to breathe. And this even affects cardiovascular function, eventually resulting in cardiac arrest. Again, it's a very fatal condition, but can be prevented with the diphtheria vaccine. So just read a little more about these conditions, and please make a note of the vaccines that India has developed. So on this note, I bring my analysis to an end. If you've liked the session, do support us with your likes and comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.